It's time for another Dice Tower review with Robert Geistlinger.
In 1640, a ghastly curse overtook an island because, well, it could. Pirates soon took advantage of it and started burying their treasure, only to lose track of it. Well, now we're explorers who have come across this island and have decided to try and take that treasure for ourselves, but we're also going to have to deal with the curse of the island. Today we're taking a look at Loot Island. So here we're taking a look at Loot Island. This is a game for 2 to 5 players where players will be working to try to reassemble maps in order to discover the treasures that this cursed island has buried on it. In doing so, they will also have to take some of those curses upon themselves. Now the game is played over 5 rounds with 3 phases in each round. Now the first phase is the preparation phase, and in the first round of the game this is skipped, but I am going to cover it now so you are aware of it. The first thing that's going to happen is the ship here is going to move from this coast to the next coast in the direction it is pointing. That means that at the end of this round we are going to be exploring this particular coast, and one thing to keep in mind about coasts is they do have 2 landing spots. After this, any of these small island tiles that were used in the previous round will be flipped back up and made available again. We will then change out the event here, moving to the next event, and I'll explain how events work here in a little bit. And then players will have the option, if they wish, to discard down cards from their hand and then replenish back up to their hand limit, which in this game is 7. After this, we're going to move into phase 2, which is the actions phase. And in the actions phase, each player on their turn can take exactly 1 action and play will go around the table. The first action a player can do is they can use one of these small islands. In order to do so, they simply need to discard 2 map cards from their hand of a matching color and then select which one of these they wish to use. Now, something to keep in mind is that you don't have to use it. You could simply be flipping it over to stop another player from doing so. The various actions we have here that can happen are things such as moving our discs to the bottom of the stack. We could draw some cards. We could even move the ship to the new coast. The other action a player can do on their turn, which is the primary thing, is to play map cards from their hand. And in doing so, they're going to be playing them to a landing of their choice. So first they're going to declare the landing. So I may say I'm going to play to this one, in which case if I don't have a compass disc there, I will place one on it. Now when you're doing this, you're only going to play to the landing that you have declared, whether there are cards there or not. But you're going to get to play any number of cards from your hand with the following rules, is that you have to match the color that's here. So once a color is determined, it's the only color in that landing, and the numbers need to go numerically from smallest to lowest. But in this case, we have all of these red cards. We could play the 1, the 2, the 5, and the 7. However, if we wish, we could have just only played the 1 and 2. But we'll say that we played them all. We're also going to need to resolve anything that's on those cards, if any, such as here where this 5 means that anyone who is currently at that landing can draw a card to their hand. This little chest symbol here just means that for purposes of getting loot, this one will have an additional loot drawn. The +1 means for purposes of counting the number of cards, this card counts as if it is 2 cards. Now the 1 card is a little special in that it can be played as a 1, in which case, if we played it like this by itself or starting a stack, that every other player at the table would take a curse cube to their player board. However, if there were already cards there, such as this, and we went to play this 1 on our turn, it instead would slip into the top of the stack and then give the player who played it 2 options. They could either discard a curse cube from their player card, or if there is a draw card in the stack that they're playing it to, they can choose instead to draw a card. Other types of cards that could go there is this one, which would allow everyone who's at the landing to remove a curse cube. The last action a player can do on their turn is to simply pass. And to pass, you simply declare your pass intentions, turn your map cards face down, and you are now out for the remainder of this round. Once every player at the table has passed, then the action phase will end and we'll move to the loot phase. Now in the loot phase, we're going to be exploring the 2 landings of the coast that the ship is currently pointed at. And we're going to be looking for a big loot and a small loot landing. First, we're going to check to see if there are, first off, the prerequisite number of cards. Now, we're set up here for a 3-player game, which means we need to have at least 4 cards here. Well, because of this, we actually count as 5. So if there had been cards at this landing here of 4, then this would be the big loot landing. The way each of these are drawn depends on whether they're big or small. If it's the big loot landing, in the case this is, and we're going to throw a couple extra discs here just to make this a little simpler and make more sense. We're first going to draw treasure cards equal to the number of discs present. So we would draw 3 of these cards. Then we're going to look in the stack for any of these chest symbols and draw an additional card. If this, on the other hand, had been the small loot landing, then we would only draw cards for the treasure chest shown in the stack and not for the discs. Regardless, as we have drawn the cards, now in disc order, starting from the bottom going up, each player will get to select a loot from here. So the blue player is at the bottom and they could select one. So maybe they select this amulet. They have a choice to either keep the amulet as one of their now collected treasures, or they can discard it and remove 2 curse cubes. However, amulets are special. So let's say that the yellow player took this one and they decided to keep this 10 here because it's 10 points at the end. That means they have to take 3 curse cubes because there is a 3 on it. And then the white player, let's say they take this one. And then it comes back to the blue player who takes the final one. Well, the blue player decides that they don't want this card. Instead, they want to get rid of curse cubes. Well, now they get to remove 2 curse cubes for the loot, plus 1 for each amulet. So they would actually get to remove 3 curse cubes. We'll do the exact same for the small loot island, and then we will go back to the preparation phase. Now, a couple points I want to make before we continue on is this first player token. Whoever passes out of a round first does take this and will be the first player at the start of the next turn. In addition, I mentioned these events up here. These event cards are something that is going to affect the particular round that we are in. And there's a bunch of them, and they're referenced in the book as to what they do. So if we were looking at that card that was up during the first round, this one here, it is an A3. Now, as you get used to the game, you'll eventually know what they mean by the symbology, but initially you can look here in the book. So we look up A3, and it's a phase 2. Each time a player uses a small island, they take a curse cube. So if during that earlier phase we had chosen to maybe use this island, we would have additionally had to take a curse cube. The last thing that happens during a phase, regardless of whether or not a landing was small, big, or not explored at all, is all of the cards on it are discarded and all of the discs are returned to the players who use them. Any unexplored ones still will remain in place. And in fact, during the phase 2, you are allowed to play to the other ones in preparation for later rounds. Play will continue round and round like this until the end of round 5, in which case we're going to go into some final scoring. First thing that's going to happen is we're going to explore any unexplored landings that do have the right amount of cards, but we're going to treat those as small loot landings. Then we're going to check any player who has 13 or more curse cubes at present, and they are going to be automatically eliminated from the game. Then we're going to deal out these healer cards. Now, these healer cards are going to allow us to get rid of our remaining curse cubes at a cost. So each player, starting with the one who has the least amount of curse cubes, will draft one of those to their player area. And then we will check for loot values. Now, loot values each of the cards will have a number on them as their value, but some cards will contain bonuses, and there's a player aid here that determines how that works. So there are certain cards that have to combine with other treasures in order to get. There's these little crosses that are a collection, and whoever has the most of them gets 25, second place 18. There's these ones here that look like pieces of puzzle, where if you have 2 in a set, you can get 8, or 3 in a set, 20. And those scores are going to be added up using these little scoring pad here. Then the last thing that's going to happen is, using the points they have, is they're going to need to pay the cost of their healer in order to remove cubes. So this one here says that it has a flat cost of 9 and then 1 per cube. So if the blue player was at, they would lose 9 points plus an additional 1 for a cube. At this point, we're going to tally up the scores on the sheet, and whoever has the most points is the winner. So let's look at Loot Island. Now this game took me as a bit of surprise. When I first heard that What's Your Game, one of my favorite publishers, was putting out a new game for Essen 2017, I immediately assumed it would be a medium or heavyweight Euro, and I couldn't be further off in that. This game is a family game. It's a lighter weight game, but it's actually really enjoyable and a nice change of pace from the What's Your Game titles I'm used to. I really enjoyed the way players do need to work together a bit to try to make sure the landings have the right amount of cards in them, and even try to coordinate putting down the cards in order to fill it up. But I also like how at the end of the day, you still want the lion's share of the loot and the mouse's share of the curse cubes. I enjoy the risk reward in the treasure cards themselves as well, because you have to make a decision every time you take a treasure item. Do you want to keep it and take curses? Do you want to get rid of it and get rid of some of those curses? Because managing your curse cubes is really important in this game, especially given if you have 13 or more at the end of the game, you're completely out. Speaking of the end of the game, I also enjoyed and was a little off-put by the healing cards. Now there is a variant that allows players to know them from the start of the game, but that simplifies it a little too much. It is nice knowing that there's an unknown variable, but it really can mess you up. So on one game, you could end up paying just one point per curse cube. On another game, you could play 17 and remove all of them. Yet in another, you play 12 and maybe 2 per curse cube. So it's this unknown at the end of the game. Speaking of the end of the game, that is another thing that was a little odd for me, and it may have just been me personally. I had a hard time keeping track of my points throughout the game. I just wasn't sure where I stood as the game progressed. They have those bonuses, and those are fairly simple to keep an idea on, but as far as my overall points, I just felt kind of out in the blue in terms of what my points were until we actually started tallying scores. One other negative I had about the game was the fact that while this is not an overly complex game, it's an odd game to teach. I found each time I taught the game, the player's eyes kind of glazed over during the rules, because while there's not a ton of rules, it just seems like there is, and teaching it, there's no real good order to teach it in. However, I found every player at the table by the end of one round had the game down pat. I also enjoyed, for replayability reasons, those events, because there are more than just the 5 you deal out, and that's going to be different every game and really does lend to the overall replayability of this game. I also really liked those small island tiles, because that was something that it was a nice touch to the game, but there was one part of it that didn't feel needed, but felt great when playing it. Because in most games, you can't take an action if you can't complete or don't want to complete that action. Whereas in here, it's a strategic option to go ahead and take it just for the fact of blocking other players to do it, and I really did enjoy that. Overall, I really do enjoy the push your luck element to this game. I love the fact that you have to manage your curse cubes, you have to make difficult decisions when it comes to taking the treasure, and you have to work together while working against each other. For me, this was an unexpected surprise of a game, and one that I'm definitely going to be keeping in my personal collection. I hope you've enjoyed this look at Loot Island, and it's helped you decide whether or not this might be a game for you and your game group, and I look forward to seeing you folks next time.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at Dicetowernetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.